Hello, everybody. I presume that's the trigger to start. Welcome to this webinar run by the UKRI GCRF Action Against Stunting Hub. My name is Greg Cooper. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Sheffield, and I'm joined here by my colleagues on the Action Against Stunting Hub, who you'll meet very, very shortly when they present. So we have Dr. Rachana Konapur, who is a postdoctoral research associate here at NIN, the National Institute of Nutrition here in Hyderabad, and also Kritika Selvaraj, who is the field operations manager on the Action Against Stunting Hub project. So, yeah, without further ado, I mean, let's get into the first presentation. This webinar is all about our work in the food systems theme, and in particular, the recent work we've been doing in food environments. And as some of you may know, led by Dr. Sunita Kadiala and previously also Dominic Rowland, they've been developing for the last year or so a novel food environment tool, which aims to characterize some of the kind of facilitating factors and also some of the barriers behind households within our cohort. So households which have children and households which are vulnerable to the causes of stunting. Tries to classify some of these facilitators and barriers to the access to healthy food groups such as green leafy vegetables or eggs or other animal sourced foods. And basically we've been doing some cognitive testing of our survey, trying to understand whether it makes sense, whether it translates across languages, local cultures, and other issues as well, which we'll soon dive into. So I'm going to give a brief presentation on the food environment tool and the cognitive interviewing background. And then Archana is going to present on the methods we've been doing over the last month or so. And then Kritika is going to be presenting on some of the results, the ways in which this preliminary work has helped to improve the food environment tool so far. So let's jump into this. And we realize that the title of the seminar is quite big, quite broad. It's quite an important and significant question. And really just to give you a one-slide summary of our webinar today, the answer to this is that potentially the surveys that we develop and you develop as researchers, as practitioners, may not make sense, particularly if we haven't tested and taken into account variations in language. That could even be from kind of the translation from English to the local language done by a translation agency. This may also need to be checked before we then test the survey in kind of the field environment, all the way through to local sensitivities and practices. So there is a chance that your surveys may not make sense, and we're going to try to build the kind of the rationale and the reasoning behind doing some cognitive testing prior to rolling out surveys. So let's let's introduce the food environment profiling tool, the survey which we are then doing the cognitive testing on. So does our food environment tool make sense in local context, in the local language, and with all of the local context factored in? So just to give you an overview of the food environment tool, as I mentioned, the aim of the food environment tool is to rapidly characterize some of the facilitators and some of the barriers to our local population, to actually them accessing foods which may help to combat childhood stunting. So this could be green leafy vegetables, it could be fruits and vegetables more generally, or it could be animal source foods. And at the moment, we're really focusing on green leafy vegetables to help develop and validate this tool. One of the main rationale behind this is that a lot of food environments work has been done in high-income countries, where there's often kind of unhealthy food environments, but relatively little work has been done on developing lower middle-income country food environments, where often food environments are quite transitory, they're quite dynamic, they may change day to day or season to season. And actually this then adds some added complexities to try to characterize and profile the food environment. And what are we then trying to capture, and what are we trying to achieve with our food environment tool? Well, the first is an element of generalizability or having kind of a universal tool which can be applied to different food groups. So that could be GLVs, or it could be animal source foods, to different geographies. So that could be urban or rural food environments, or Hyderabad or Lombok in Indonesia. So something which can be rapidly administered or adapted slightly to capture variations. In turn, we want to be able to use the food environment tool to identify some of the food environment domains based upon Chris Turner's food environment framework from 2018 and 2020, and we'll see a couple of those references shortly. So trying to identify which food environment domain around convenience or food hygiene and safety, or the physical accessibility and safety of the market environment, for example, which of these domains has the most significant influence on the barriers and the facilitators to households accessing the food group of interest. So in this case, GLVs. And then we hope that these findings, once we've actually done the food environment tool and the data collection, will be useful for policymakers to prioritize different interventions, to where to intervene within the food environment. Do we need to make our markets more safe for mothers to access? Do we need to improve food safety and hygiene standards, for example? So where are we currently? Just to go through this, a lot of formative work has been done by Dominic and Sunita as well over the last year or so. And I know a few of you on this call have contributed as well to some of that formative research. The initial kind of scoping studies then went through initial expert consultation, where at least 11 or 12 experts in the food environments were consulted, and different ideas were discussed and considered to then develop an initial food environment tool. In turn, this was then again kind of evaluated by a group of experts to try to make the questions more precise and try to make the questions more meaningful, thinking about what are the end results we're going to be trying to produce from this survey. And this has then led to the revision of the tool and where we are currently. So before the Hyderabad team and also the Indonesian team as well, who are working on this at the same time, just before they started their field work, we had a version of the food environment tool, which we were pretty happy with, but of course it hadn't been field tested. So yeah, this is where we are currently. And the next stages are then pilot testing, actually collecting data around food environments, and then actually incorporating it into the main hub surveys. And I should just say, I forgot to mention at the start, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box. So let's just have a quick run through of the modules of the food environment tool. What does the tool actually look like? The first tries to capture who actually is in charge, essentially, of getting food for household consumption within our cohort households. It's not always a mother, and we quickly realize that pregnant mothers, for example, may not have that responsibility, and it may be the husband or the mother-in-law, for example. And then the next module then tries to really define the activity space that the household kind of interact with when they go about their daily routines, and then try to understand the availability and the affordability of green leafy vegetables in this example within their activity space. From here, we then look at the individual domains, and that's around understanding how the participants interact with different kind of payment and acquisition approaches, how they perceive the importance of convenience or food security, food safety, physical kind of security of the market environment, for example, how the participants perceive the importance of these towards their interaction with the activity space and the way they go about acquiring GLVs. And then lastly, we have a new module which we only added about a month ago. And what we do is we ask the participant to explicitly rank the different reasons why they go about acquiring GLVs. And each of these different ranks, there are currently 8 or 9 different reasons, I think it's 8. Each of these come from the different domains in the previous module. And what we try to do is identify the top 3 reasons why the participant actually purchases GLVs for the household. Is it aspirational? Is it due to convenience? Is it due to price relative to other food groups, and so on. And this module D then not only provides an explicit ranking, but also as a kind of validation for the rest of the survey. So that's a very brief overview. And of course, as we develop this more and more, we'll be communicating what is in the food environment tool more over time. So then why would we need to do cognitive testing? Why would we need to pre-test our survey before actually going out into the field and collecting the raw data? Well, this is one of the very first questions in the food environment tool, and it asks the participant to essentially list all of the sources in which they and their household members have gotten food for household consumption within the last 30 days. So all the different shops and the different sources, where have you been in the last 30 days? Perhaps conceptually that's reasonably straightforward, but of course when you actually go into the field, you start to question, how suitable is a recall period? Should we be doing 1 week? Should we be doing 30 days? Should we extend that further? In turn, how suitable is some of the language and the phraseology, and how well does it translate to the local language? So does daily routine, does it translate well to Telugu, for example, here in Hyderabad? And also, does it reverse translate as well back into English? In turn, do the different answers we have listed here, are these actually practiced in our study sites, or are they actually quite alien concepts? And lastly, do our options here on the left-hand side for where they have acquired food, are these exhaustive, or will we quickly find that participants have been to other sources as well? So I'm just conscious of time, so I'll keep going, but just to give you an idea that there are a number of different dimensions to these questions, I need to go about understanding, are the participants able to understand our meaning behind the questions? Are they able to identify appropriate answers? And how meaningful are our questions? So let's go into cognitive testing, and just to give you a bit of an overview of this, and some of you may well be familiar with cognitive testing and cognitive interviewing. Essentially, cognitive testing tries to understand the influence and the magnitude of 4 different potential sources of error from the point of asking the question, so the food environment tool question, to the respondent, to the point in which they actually provide a response. And a lot of the cognitive interviewing kind of theory came about during the 1980s, and this is one kind of famous model within this field. But there are 4 sources of error when participants are giving responses. The first is that participants may interpret the intention of the question differently to how we intend. They may think, why is he or she actually asking this question? And then actually the individual terms, such as availability or affordability, that there may be some lack of understanding around these terms. In turn, how easy does the participant find it to actually recall the information over the last 30 days, for example? And what are the strategies they use to try to recall this information? Do they need to guesstimate? Do they have it written down somewhere? Is it a habitual behavior? So what do they do to recall this information? In turn, participants may then have to make a decision about whether they want to answer the question, depending upon whether the information is personal or a secret, or perhaps culturally sensitive. And lastly, participants then need to actually, in terms of a quantitative survey or one where there is a multiple choice answers, they then need to match their own responses to those given by the survey. And of course, if these do not match, then this could lead to some errors, both in the questioning and also in the results. So let's just to kind of go over again, what is cognitive interviewing? And really, as I've just said, there are 3 main aims. So the first is to identify potential errors, which we have made in the wording and the actual comprehension of the question. The next is to then to evaluate whether the data generated is as intended by the interviewer. So that's not meaning there is a right or wrong answer, but whether the data which comes back from the participant is in the right format. If you're looking for a date, but the answer comes back as a number, then perhaps there's an issue here. In turn, cognitive interviewing then tries to guide where we can revise the surveys to actually minimize some of these errors before actually then collecting the data. And I have a few of these references at the end if you're interested in learning more about cognitive interviewing. In particular, the last two references here by Kerry Scott and Satvika Ashok, who is of IPRI in Delhi. These are really, really great papers based in India, and they've helped to inform the study we're doing here as well. The use of cognitive testing in Indian health and nutrition contexts. So just to give you a bit more detail on the Scott example, just for the next minute or so. So they were doing cognitive interviewing of a respectful maternity care survey, which was originally designed for use in Kenya and Ethiopia. And in particular, what they found was the use of Likert scales were particularly inappropriate in the context in a rural area in Madhya Pradesh. And what they did is they tested 14 different types of Likert scales. So they used different colors, different Hindi vocabulary, different star symbols, and even emojis. And still they found that actually the respondents were unable to fully grasp the meaning of these different stages. They were getting confused, the data quality was poor. And what they actually ended up doing is removing all Likert scales from the survey and simply going to a yes and no binary option, and then having open questions as well in order to allow the respondent to provide more detail, if I recall correctly. But essentially they got rid of all Likert scales, and they believe that this revision really helped to improve the quality of the survey and the data they were collecting going forward. So just a final couple of slides before passing over to Archana. So what cognitive testing is a collection of the verbal information about the quality and the errors associated with the questions themselves, rather than the actual answers to the questions. And a number of authors have tried to make kind of quantitative metrics around cognitive testing and the outcomes, but generally the approach is qualitative, and you do interviews, you transcribe those interviews, and you try to spot themes and key hotspots of misunderstanding. In turn, this is used to revise the survey, the wording, the phrasing, and also there's no one-size-fits-all approach. You may opt to do focus group discussions, one-to-one interviews. The key is capturing a diversity of different perceptions, different life experiences, ages, to then be able to understand how different people may misinterpret certain keywords or certain contexts or concepts. And then just what cognitive testing isn't, it isn't a pilot survey. We're not collecting kind of the data on the food environment tool. We're collecting data about the questions in the food environment tool. Also, by doing cognitive testing, it's not a guarantee that you can produce a perfect survey. There may well still be errors there, and of course, the way you train your enumerators, for example, may influence whether questions are asked in the right way or the right phrasing. So this is certainly not a tool to produce a perfect survey, and we certainly shouldn't pretend that it is. Also, as I mentioned, the aim of cognitive surveys is to kind of survey a diversity of different perceptions, and actually often only say 10 to 20 cognitive surveys are done. And of course, these are not statistically representative. You can't really do any inferential statistics, for example, on the outcomes. And also, they shouldn't be confused with cognitive interviews, which is, I'm sure most of you have seen the police detective programs where the police sit down and interrogate the witness. So those are cognitive interviews. This is cognitive interviewing or cognitive testing. And actually, during my initial literature review, I was for a long time reading about cognitive interviews before I realized actually this is a slightly different literature. So just very, very finally, the last slide before passing on to Archana. Just to really go over our three key aims. Are the questions we're asking in our food environment tool meaningful, both conceptually, so actually the types of concepts and the theories we're talking about in our tool, but then also the wording in terms of the language and translation. Are these meaningful to the participants? Do the answer options make sense in terms of the Likert scale, in terms of the different sources of where you may procure food, for example? Do these make sense? Are respondents able to recognize these? And do we then need to develop additional material to help to kind of reduce the cognitive burden upon respondents? Do we need to use color coding or images or text in a different language, for example, to help actually make our surveys more understandable, make them make sense? Very, very lastly, this is where we are currently sat here. We are currently revising the food environment tool with our recent kind of lessons from the cognitive testing. We will then be doing a second round of cognitive interviewing once we meet with our Indonesian colleagues. They've also got some findings, which I'm sure we'll hear about in the future. And we'll then be doing a second round to then get ready for the actual formal piloting of the FE tool and the rollout of the food environment tool early next year or in springtime next year. So that here is the references, and I'll of course be happy to share some of this key literature. You're more than welcome to email me or perhaps sharing this recording afterwards. And thank you very much for listening. I hope that has set the scene. And I'll now pass over to we'll take questions and so on at the end. So please, carry on posting questions, maybe around the FE tool or whatever. So
good afternoon and good morning to good morning and good afternoon to one and all. I am Archana. Now we will be discussing about the methodology of conducting the interview to test the food environment tool. As we all know that food environment is content context specific. The first step in conducting cognitive testing the tool is translating the questionnaire from English to Telugu. The Action Against Stunting Hub food environment team had developed this tool in English language, and which needs to be translated. So we initially translated the questionnaire from English to local language, that is Telugu, via a translation agency. After Professor Sunita had come to India as a part of her work, we sat and we cross-checked the food environment tool with all the team members of Stunting Hub, and we found out that the few terms in the questionnaire were too technical and few of them were not in usage. So we sat for 1 or 2 days to do discussion in detail and replace a few terms, especially like affordability. Arthika Samarthata is what we call it in Telugu, which is very difficult to understand by the local people, and a few of the terms were not in usage. So we brought down it to a simpler language like Kharchu Pettagalgina Dhara, which means the price you are able to spend. So the entire questionnaire with many modifications was being translated in MS Word. So after translating the questionnaire, we went to field for pre-testing. This is the first round of pre-testing the questionnaire. So we thought of going to 3 areas like urban area, rural area, and urban slum, so that we'll get the information with different educational backgrounds and economic status. And to reach the households, we needed the help of Anganwadi teachers and Stunting Hub field team in Hyderabad and also in one rural area. And we did one survey in NIN quarters itself. So number of participants were 4 in the initial round of survey. We took consent for participation and also for audio recording the entire discussion. So after taking consent, we read question by question and option by option to the participant, and all this entire after each question was followed up by the cognitive questions, and the responses were noted down in the printed copy, which was in Telugu language. This entire process took about 2 hours. And then followed by this, the challenges we observed, we faced during the first round of interview was the certain terminologies were difficult to understand, such as affordability, collecting food. The concept itself was very alien to them, and also the concept of food hygiene was not at all there. And the second thing was the questions, few questions like question number 10 in the food environmental was very lengthy, and a few of the Likert scale options were very repetitive. So due to this and the time also, it was taking about 2 hours, participants become very less attentive, and they were frustrated also. And the third challenge we faced was a poor cognitive capacity among the mothers. As I said earlier, in the question 10 in the food environmental tool, there were a number of options which the participant had to remember. So they got distracted due to the number of options provided, and also the ambiguity in the question. So the action we took for this is, while asking the questions, we asked the participants to provide alternative synonyms for the particular term, like for barter system or credit or anything. What is the local term they generally use for those practices? And we rephrased the terminologies in the newly translated questionnaire. And the third option was to develop visual tools, because the concept of hygiene was not there, and affordability and the collecting foods, these things were new to them, and few things were alien to them. They were not able to understand it. So we thought developing visual tools will be much easier for them to answer our questions, and also to save time, as they were taking too much of time to understand and give responses to our questions. So to develop the visual tools, we developed visual tools only for those main themes which we had a problem during our cognitive interview. The rationale for using this visual tool is to understand, to make participants understand. The understanding of the participants should be similar across the country, and across different levels of educational and socioeconomic status background. So we developed a diagrammatic representation for Likert scale, and for remaining food hygiene, social and cultural desirability, and barriers and facilitators for green leafy vegetables, we developed a pictorial representation. And the challenges we faced during developing these images were, like, for example, the activity space. How detailed the because activity space is the first question we faced a lot of problem, because there is no particular term in Telugu to describe what activity space is, what all it includes. We were able to explain to them, but they were not able to capture it, and they were not able to visualize what actual activity space is. So we tried to incorporate few images, and a lot of discussion and debate had also happened, what all should be included, and whether arrows should be made from household to shops as such. And the second thing was finding relatable photos in terms of society and culture. While doing cognitive interviews, the term of society in Telugu is samajam. No one gave response to that word society, because they know what society for them. Society is inclusion of 4 people or 10 people or people around their home, but they don't know the word society as such. So we had a lot of discussion on what photos to include and how to make people understand what society and culture is. And the third one is how specific the photos should be, like a promotion, like taking a photograph in the shop, or making a more generalizable images. As such, this image, it is written like, buy 4 green leafy vegetables and get 1 green leafy vegetable free. These are the few specific context specific images we have made. And for this purpose, we have conducted formative research, which included market survey and focus group discussion. Market survey was to get an idea of the food environment in the study area, from where all they get fruits and vegetables and other groceries, and what are the sources of food procurement. And focus group discussion was to understand the terminologies, perceptions, and their local practices. Because in the initial discussions, we came to know that few practices are not available, but Professor Sunita still wanted to retain those questions in the questionnaire, because those practices might be still practiced in Indonesia or Senegal. So for that purpose, we have retained a few questions, even though they are not practiced here. And these are the images of the market survey. Here we can see this is the Monda market. Monda market is a very huge market area wherein we get all the fruits and vegetables, dry fishes, and the flesh food items. We do have wholesale shops and retail shops in that Monda market. This is the area from where the hub participants go to get procure their foods. And this is the market in this hub area itself. We have limited small kirana store is like a small grocery store and a super mini market and local vendors who do come on a daily basis. So then coming to the focus group themes, in focus group discussions, we have picked only those themes which were not understood by the mothers or the participants during our first round of survey. So we asked them what is the mean by these individual terms to them. What does safety or physical access mean to them, and what does offer promotion mean to them? Followed by this, we asked the difference between these terms. Like hygiene, they were not able to understand hygiene, chemicals, adulterants as such. And for this purpose, we had done market survey and collected few photos. And we have asked them what is the difference between these terms. Are they similar or are they different? We asked them to define them. Then what are the existing practices relevant, specific to the themes? And then after we took the photographs from the market survey, we placed the photographs relevant to the themes in pairs and asked them to choose one photograph per theme. And we asked why did they choose that particular photo? What made them choose? And if we asked them to suppose the photograph as a market and ask them which shop would they go to purchase these fruits or vegetables. And the third question we asked them is to say the another synonym for the particular word. And for the coming to the ranking test, as we have already told that question number 10 and 11 has many options in it for which participants wouldn't remember, because we asked them to rank which is the most important point to them, which makes them to buy the fruits and vegetables, green leafy vegetables particularly. So they were not able to remember 8 points and rank them. For this purpose, what we have done is we took images from Google, Platicon, and also market survey images. And we have written the titles over the photographs or relevant titles in English and Telugu language. So in the field, for what we have done is we displayed the photographs. We took 9 photographs and we displayed the photos on the floor, and the participants were asked to look at individual photos. And we asked them to explain the meaning of individual photos within the context. After explaining, if they had correctly answered the photograph within the context, we continued with the procedure. If they answered it as different, like the photograph of a sociocultural thing, they interpreted as differently, which Kritika will be presenting it in the results. We then corrected them, saying that this is not what you have understood. This is like this. We have corrected them, and we asked them to rank it. Rank which is most important facilitator, which makes them to buy green leafy vegetables. And these are the photographs which we have displayed on the floor. This is activity space. Herein we can see at the center we have kept one home. We asked them to consider it as their home, and surrounding places from where all they go to get fruits and vegetables. This is the best what we could have done to capture the activity space to make the participants understand. And this is for price, and this is for exchange of foods. Few people have interpreted it as differently. And again, Kritika will be discussing about this in the results. And this is about the time, hygiene, information they will be obtaining via different media, and socio-cultural aspects, and accessibility, and offer and promotions. These are like very specific photos which we have collected from Google, and also we have made it in the PowerPoint presentations and combined it, and we have used. And this is the maximum what we could have done. And development this is with the Likert scale, as we have said that like earlier there were 5 options to get, like for example, in the previous 30 days, how many times you have brought green leafy vegetables to your home, or did you see green leafy vegetables? The options we provided to them was never, rarely, around half the time, most of the time, and every time. But after initial 2 round of interviews, we thought that less than half the time option should also be included, because 1 or 2 of the respondent had answered that. So we included that also in the questionnaire. But the challenge we faced during administering the Likert scale was the mothers were able to accurately identify the options like never and always and every time, but they struggled with adjacent options like most of the time, every time, rarely, and around half the time. And the terminologies were also like not used or like similar in Telugu language. We had problem in Telugu language. Again, this will be discussed in detail by Kritika. And for this purpose, we thought of using different images and diagrams so that mothers will be able to easily understand the concept of Likert scale and answer us correctly. And as we can see in the first column, we tried first with the first column, like writing the numbers and filling like always, never, rarely, sometimes. But few mothers got confused with the number of times they had purchased and number of times they went to markets. Then we removed the numbers and we just filled the boxes. Even then, this was not completely understood by the mothers. Then we then shifted to green leafy vegetable images. The results of this section will be discussed by Kritika.
Stop sharing.
You start.
Okay. With all the iterations that we, just a second. Yeah, sorry for the confusion. With all the iterations that we did with the methods, we understood three important things that should be kept in mind when we are going to do a cognitive testing. So the first one is to address the misunderstanding among participants. The second is to provide adequate options for them so that it will be easy for them to tell us the reasons. And miscellaneous issues, I'll give some practical examples from our experience to make it easier. The first one is to address the misunderstanding among participants. So the first thing is the issue we felt was the confusing language that was used. So as Archana was explaining, there are after a lot of iterations and a lot of discussions, there were still words that were unfamiliar among the participants. For example, the affordability and exchange of food kind of things. And the Likert scale, the numbers and symbols were confusing them, and it was like distracting the participants from the concept of the Likert scale. And the supplementary photos from food hygiene, when like the usual pattern is to pile the photos and ask the participants to pick the photos that were relevant for their conditions. We also followed the similar pattern, but we found that participants were not getting the concept or the themes clearly. So initially they said everything looks fresh, which was not what we expected them. So then we paired it in opposites. For example, for the concept of freshness, we kept fresh and wilted leaves together. So we asked them to choose one over the other, and that way it was helpful. Then the next one was using the relevant variety and local like shops and other things. So this was like this issue happened with participants. We initially went with an idea of a common pictorial representations, but the participants found it difficult to interpret it because it was not a common practice in their area. For example, we used a picture of a spring onion, which was not a commonly consumed leafy vegetable here. So, and there was a picture of a child, like there was a picture showing the family condition and social values, but people interpreted it to be child marriage. And also the food exchange picture, they thought transfer of infection, or it was totally unrelated to the themes of the concept. Then the other issue that we felt was in the difference in practices between food groups. So this was like, for example, there was a question where we asked, is there a possibility to get credit, GLVs on credit? So this practice, though it was followed in the region, it was not for leafy vegetables, it was for groceries. So they didn't understand that terminology to be used for GLVs. So that also caused some confusions, and people were not giving us appropriate answers. And so what we have done to address this is to include an option for not practiced, and also ask them to explain for what items they do the credit for. So the focus group discussions that we conducted helped us to understand the local priorities and preferences, which has now been incorporated into the questionnaire. Respondents also struggled to understand when we gave hypothetical situations to them. Like, for example, if they had any common practice, like if we give them a hypothetical situation, like imagine you went to this market for 5 times and all, people were not able to relate it to their buying practices, and it was also leading to a lot of distractions. Their second theme was to provide adequate answers for them. For example, our food sources list was not comprehensive. So even though we were having around 15 to 18 food items, still like there were no options for including the commonly visited chicken shop and related places. So, and the second thing is Likert scale that was used in Telugu. The terms that was used were it was difficult to literally translate in Telugu. So the Telugu terms were not commonly used, and making the mother understand the term by itself was a challenge. And the adjacent objects, like for example, like Archana was explaining the Likert scale, there were 8 options that was given to them. So they were able to immediately tell about the extreme options such as never and always, but the intermediate options such as more than half the time and once in a while, it was difficult for the mothers to comprehend and tell us. The last thing is about the ranking scale. So like again, initially we had thought to give all the options for the mothers and ask them to rank from 1 to 9. But it created a lot of comprehensive load on the mother, and she was not able to remember all the options given to her. So, and also it was like, it was redundant to keep asking her to continue ranking. So we stopped and asked the mother to give only the top 3 reasons for either buying a green leafy vegetable or not buying a green leafy vegetable. Apart from these 2 major issues, there were also some miscellaneous issues. One was the repetitiveness. This was not controlled by us because this was a compulsory thing to be done to have a standardized survey. So we kept asking the mother a few things again and again, and this led to the mothers being frustrated, and they lost patience. And also the other thing is to communicate the purpose of cognitive questions. So and compared to a regular survey where we just ask for responses, this was to understand their knowledge and the way they understand few things. So, but because the mothers immediately gave an answer and we kept asking them to explain, it was irritating them, and they stopped responding after a while. Also, including new questions. So, like with time, we understood there needs to be some questions in between questions to assist the survey. Like for example, who brings the foods to the home, and how many times did the member go to the house? Because we presumed that it was always the mother who brought the food items because she prepares the food, but it can be anyone in the family. So there should be questions to give us an understanding of what happens in the family and to better understand the behavior in the household. So the key takeaways from the testing that we have done so far is 3. The first one is understand the local context. It's very important because like with the technical things and technical terminologies and the sources and everything were like not relatable to the participants. So it is important to understand what is practiced and what is the perspectives of the local people, and also to strike a balance between keeping the tool generalizable across the different scenarios. And also the translations needs to be very precise because as we had discussed, it took 2 days for us to do the translation. In spite of it, there were terminologies that were still difficult. So, but after field testing, we came to know even more simpler words from the participants, and that was very helpful. And also the last thing is to like as always, less is sometimes more. So not to overdo things when you're giving visual cues, like don't include all the images, numbers and words and everything that is possible. Keep it minimum, and that will be the cue. So I think I'll end here and Greg can continue.
Okay, hello, I'm back. Hello, everybody. Hopefully my sound is okay. We're just balancing having our audio on, our mics on, our videos on. But yeah, thank you very much, Archana, Kritika. That was awesome. And if anything else, this webinar has really helped us to start documenting and thinking critically about what we have been collecting in the field, what are some of the key insights, how this should help, or how this will help to inform what we have been doing actually around the development of the tool. So that was a bit of a whirlwind, and for us, the last 45 minutes certainly zoomed past. So yeah, I've got to just have a look at the Q&A box. We hope also you can post questions in the Q&A box, or if you want to raise your hand, I think Alessia has the ability to unmute you. So if you want to participate, by asking your question out loud, then please raise your hand, as I think somebody has. So perhaps let's have a look at this first question, which is sent by Modu. I hope I pronounced your name right. Thanks, Greg and the team, for highlighting really simple but often forgotten practice. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I know for certain, like we have done surveys in the past without really thinking about the meaning of the words in our questions, but also actually getting the local the translated version of the survey then actually checked by local speakers, whether that's Sunita, whether that's Archana and Kritika here. Certainly is a relatively common practice to take that agency translated survey straight into the field. Okay, so I believe participation of local research team in the design and administration of the survey is a cornerstone, saves time, improves quality of data. Opting for interview administered instead of self-administered survey to improve the clarity around language. Interviewers could, but the caution is that interviewers should not influence outcomes of the survey. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this survey will be administered by an interviewer, kind of like sitting side by side in the FE tool. I completely agree with you, and particularly in the cognitive testing as well, where there are two, and something I didn't actually talk about in the introduction, there are two main approaches to cognitive interviewing. The first is to have a closed question style and to probe the respondent, and actually, you know, as kind of like a structured or a semi-structured interview would go, to kind of feedback on what they say and to have to ask a pre-written set of questions. The alternative is known as thinking aloud, and you simply allow the respondent to hear the question or to read the question, and then they verbalize their thoughts and their opinions completely unprompted. So that is supposed to reduce some of the interviewer effect. But yeah, that's a really, really valid point, and thank you very much for that. I think we have a couple of hands up.
Shall I give Rachel permission to talk? Allowed to talk.
Yeah, shall we go Rachel, as I think she asked the question as well in the chat. Let's go Rachel first, and then we'll go Naveen as well. So
hello everybody. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me fine?
Perfect.
Good. Hello. Thank you for that presentation from everybody. That was really super clear and very interesting and very nicely presented. I really enjoyed that. Could I ask a question that's a little bit less about the questions themselves, but more about, are you able to sort of set the scene for us a little bit about how you've collected that information? There were some really nice photographs I saw in those presentations. I'm just wondering about who you've been asking these questions of and how you attracted them in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think this is probably one for Kritika or Archana, so I will repeat your question if that's okay to them.
Yes.
And I think the field experts will have this knowledge. Basically.
So Rachel, we started with contacting the local places such as the Anganwadi teacher who is, am I audible? Okay. We contacted her a day before, like the Anganwadi teachers in the rural areas and the field team who is in the urban slum. So we asked them to gather people who are mothers, basically who are with children less than 5 years of age, who is representative of the sample that we will be actually doing in the survey. So we contacted the mobilizers in the areas.
Oh, okay. So you set up outside. Yes, I think you're saying
that the mothers who try to keep a profile similar to the study cohort. We've tried to get a range of different ages, whether that's younger mothers all the way through to older mothers, to try to capture differences in experience around the interaction with the environment. interaction with the food environment. For example, sorry, Raj, you can't now see me. Here we are. Sorry, it's a bit of a balancing act, a juggling act. So yeah, I hope that's helped a little bit to answer.
I think it has. Thank you. I think you were describing.
Go to Naveen. You want to unmute?
Great, Naveen, the
Hello.
stage is
Can
yours.
you hear my voice?
Yes.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Please,
Yes, we can hear you.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for all the presentations, Dr. Regar, Dr. Archana, and Dr. Kritika. My question is to Archana. Like some of the pictures are not depicting the meaning in the questionnaire. Like for example, the hygiene picture was shown in the questionnaire. There, only vegetables were shown. Instead of that, some of the hygiene indicators, like which is showing some bacteria, something, some kind of like that, which is more visible and more understanding. That is my point of discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. It was a little, the question was a little bit quiet, but we've hopefully communicated that to Archana, who is just sat to our right. So yeah, Archana.
Okay, if people were not able to understand it, earlier we have used during the first survey we have used the palak and spinach with the microbes picture, but people were not able to understand it. So we have just put the vegetables with the fresh thing, and they identified it as a fresh vegetable, hygienic vegetable.
So if they are identifying, it's good. But as a layman, if I'm saying it's only vegetables are saying, see, when you are referring it as hygiene, something which is like either washing or vegetables keeping under the water where tap water is coming.
So we have
such kind of thing.
Thank you,
Naveen,
for your question. Actually, the task of picking photos is a bit iterative, really, and it kind of again shows the importance of cognitive testing. What we may presume to be a representation of a concept or a particular process may not be what other people and what importantly prospective participants may consider. So by all means, some of these photos that were not perfect, and often we were, over this last week, we'd come back from the field, realized we need a new photo or a photo in a tool, and then quickly kind of source those back into the field. So absolutely, it's a very valid point, and thank you for that. Thank you. I have a comment here, so I'm just trying to see some of the points in the chat box as well. I have a comment here from Noor, part of the Indonesian team, talking about asking about regarding the focus group discussions. How important it is to have focus discussions in cognitive processes. Perhaps I could just talk about some of the just some of the kind of the theory, and then perhaps Archana and Kritika could talk about their actual experience of the focus group discussion. I'm conscious we have about maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes left as well. But yes, the focus group discussion can be quite an efficient way to draw different people with different perceptions together to discuss and to think about the concepts. Of course, there then builds in those dynamics around if there are different people of different ages or different socioeconomic backgrounds, they're always important to factor into the focus group discussions. But the key thing is with cognitive testing, and it is partly a blessing that there is no set way to do this, but it's also then a bit of a problem that because there is no template. But yeah, the key is really just to try and bring in or bring to the table as many different and diverse opinions and perceptions as possible. So of course, focus group discussions is a fairly efficient way to do that. But let me pass over to Archana and Kritika, who will speak about their experience actually conducting that. focus group.
Yeah, as Greg said, the conducting focus group discussion was really very helpful because as we said earlier, the key concepts like hygiene, food safety, physical access, these things were not at all understood by mothers of different educational backgrounds and socioeconomic status. In focus group discussions, mothers were like, they were discussing among themselves. If one mother had told one term, the other mother has told, like, they discussed among themselves, and it was really very helpful to get the key terms. And we got many synonyms in the focus group discussion, and also the ranking, Likert, everything. It smoothened our process. Earlier we took much time when both of the participant and also our time was wasted because they were not able to understand it all. But after the display of the photographs, the method became so easy. It was really very smooth. It's really very helpful if the same food environment tool will be administered in Indonesia and Senegal. It will be really very helpful to do the formative research earlier, so that we'll get the key terms and other practices, and also the practice such as food received in advance in place of other services. We came to know that this kind of activity is not at all present in our community. Such things like this we will get to know, and we can either remove or retain those in our questionnaires. And if there are any other practices also, we'll get to know within the community whether they're happening in this study area. And few things like collecting of foods, which we have written in the questionnaire, that is not practiced here in our urban area, but those things are practiced in the rural areas. So to get the ground reality and also to minimize the time, to save time, and also to get the new terminologies and other synonyms for the terms we have included in the questionnaire, it was really very helpful, and it will be helpful in other study areas also. If you want to include anything like that, I think Noor, you have got your answer.
Yes, thank you, Archana. And sorry, India, I think you asked a similar question, actually, which I completely, sorry about that, but hopefully Archana has provided the answer there. So I'm conscious of the time, but has anybody got any last questions at all? Any clarifications? Of course, we're completely reachable by email, which is on our profiles are on the original sign-up sheet. But really just to say that we encourage, and what we're actually learning from this is that cognitive interviewing is super important. And of course, there are many different ways to do this, but really thinking critically about the questions that we're asking, the language we're using, the phrasing, and all of these different dimensions can help to eventually save time later on. It should help to build a more robust, albeit not perfect survey, but a more robust survey. We have thought critically about local contexts, local issues, most appropriate language. So yeah, I hope this has been interesting, and this is still very much new to us, and we're learning as well as we go about doing this. So if it's okay with Alessia and team.
First, thank you very much for the presentations.
Thank you very much for coming. And by all means, please email us with any questions you may have. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.